Started all. Good morning. We began a couple of weeks ago, say for Yeshayahu Perek Aleph. He prophesied during the times of Uziyahu, Yotam, Achaz, and Chizkiyahu. Yes?
Just looking at that, that's a period of about 100 years.
Yes. He ruled for a long time. In fact, we even see where he prophesied for a long time. And he also would have liked to rule, apparently, since he was from the royal house, if you remember. He was also the first cousin of the king of Uziyahu. And in all of that time, what Yeshayahu does, he's the first of the three later prophets. And in that role, he has this combination in the first 39 prakim of both tochecha, of both rebuke, and also nechama, and also offering comfort and hope to the Jewish people. Once we hit Perek Mem, it's a sefer of nechama, much more of comfort, which is why there are those in the outside of the religious world who say that there were two Isaiahs. Because when they look at Sefer Yeshayahu, they say, well, these are two different voices we're hearing. Whereas we believe that there's one Yeshayahu, and he has two different perspectives of life, of how he's dealing with it. The Nevuah, if you remember, is not necessarily in chronological order. In fact, this Nevuah, as we mentioned earlier, according to the Abarbanel, was one that was probably delivered multiple times, this very same message, because it's this large, big message that kind of frames the entire Sefer. And as a result, it is here the first prophecy of his we're going to encounter in Perek Vav, in chapter 6. We had done the initial piece, the initial few psukim of the first Perek deal with first what's called the Ketovet, who is speaking. There was Aleph. Pasuk Aleph says who the prophet is, and then begins that first moment of Tochecha, where we started in Pasuk Bet in verse 2 with Shimu Shamayim Vazini Eretz, to listen the heavens and to pay attention the land. When you have those kinds of terminologies where we're talking to the heavens and the earth, then we're basically talking about eternity. This is something we want to be eternal, just as the heavens and the earth are eternal. And it recalls also the prophecy that we had at the end of Sefer Devarim in Parshat Ha'azinu as well. And ultimately, that opening piece really just is rebuke to the people, saying, don't you know what you have? Don't you know what you could have been? Don't you realize that even, as he says, dumb animals know who their master are, and you, for some reason, have rebelled. You can't recognize what's going on. And it takes us all the way over to Pasuk Yud. Now, in Pasuk Yud, where we left off, we had finished Tet, where Pasuk Yud, where we left off, is now going to be, for the next 10 psukim, we're going to be dealing with korbanot and various forms of service to God. Now, unfortunately, this is not something new. You find people even nowadays who perform all of the ritual and yet violate all of the spirit and possibly even much of the rule as well. And in their time, the ritual was much richer in a sense because they had a Beit HaMikdash behind everything. And so as a result, when you're dealing with korbanot, when you're dealing with the offerings, those korbanot are something you can really easily do. You just bring it. There was that perspective, and some have referred to this in modern times, that they would think of korbanot almost like a ritual vending machine. You know, insert 3 bulls, two goats, and out comes forgiveness. And that was sometimes people just viewed that you do those things and everything works out. And this is where he is going to be talking in the strongest of terms against what they're doing. And so if you look at the beginning of Pasuk Yud, it starts out with some familiar words. Shimu devar Hashem kitzine Sodom, ha'azinu Torat Elokeinu am Amorah. Listen to the word of God, the officers of Sodom. Pay attention to the teachings of God, the nation of Amorah. Now, there's all sorts of things in this one pasuk. It's easy to unpack, but to understand that unpacking, let's take it one step at a time. In terms of the verbs, we started the chapter with the same verbs, shimu and hazinu. It is the same kind of parallel to what had happened in Pasuk Aleph, in Pasuk Bet. We're calling to listen and to pay attention. And part of it is, it's obviously purposeful, because we're saying, just like we had before, where we were talking to heavens and earth, the eternal, now I'm going to go down into the most mundane of all. And who am I asking to listen? So first of all, the two nations, Sodom and Amorah, okay, Sodom and Gomorrah, they are the epitome of evil. The evil that they did, by the way, if you recall, was an evil of Ben Adam lechavero, was the evil against other people, which follows in Rav Schwab's thesis that I'd mentioned a couple of weeks ago, that really what is being attacked here is the people's inability to care for others, to take care of others. It's not so much God-centered as it is other people-centered, even though this piece is going to be dealing with korbanot, because he's going to say, basically, your korbanot are meaningless if you don't do what you're supposed to do elsewhere. So one, he's talking about the worst possible nation there. He also provides two other definitions of these people, the kitzinim and the am. Okay, a katzin is an officer, am are people. And so it seems to be as if he's referring to two different people. One is and this the Dat Mikra takes the approach, he's saying, listen to the word of God, those who are in charge, the kitzinim, the officers, and you are like Sodomites, chiefs, okay? And ha'azinu, and pay attention, Torah Elokeinu Am Amorah, the nation of Amorah, that's the average people, okay? The Am Haaretz. Listen to these things. The Torah Elokim is listen to the teachings of God, not talking specifically about the Torah itself. And what does he say? Lama li rov zivchechem, Yomar Hashem. Why do I need all of your offerings, says God? Savati olot eli. I have become, Rav Schwab uses the words, fed up. Savati means to be satiated. I assume that's probably the verb it has in the nice translations. Rav Schwab said it was, I'm fed up with the offerings you're giving of the rams, the chelev mireim, and also the fat sheep, the dam parim, and the blood of the cows, ukvasim, and the sheep, vatudim, and the male goats, lo chafatzti. I don't want them. Now, this should be recalling another similar comment, if you remember way back when in Sefer Shmuel. Back in Sefer Shmuel, when Shaul HaNavi, when Shaul HaMelech, I'm getting my prophets and my kings backwards, when Shaul HaMelech goes ahead and he leaves alive the livestock of Amalek, and he brings it back, and Shaul says, what's that? Shmuel says, what's that noise that I'm hearing? And what happens at that point? Vayomer Shmuel says, "Hachafetz laHashem ba'olotus v'achim." Okay, kishmor b'kol Hashem. Does God really want these offerings as much as he wants you to listen to what he says? Listen is better than a good offering. To pay attention, to be faithful to what God wants is better than the fat of the rams. So we've had this same message developed earlier in Tanakh, and again, Yeshayahu goes and says it one more time, but he says it in this strong and stark language, lamali, what do I need it for? And using that word savati, I'm fed up, okay, lo chafatzti, and I don't want it. So why do I need it? I'm sick and tired of it, and I don't want it. Those are the three reactions that God is having to the Jewish people. Yeah.
Is there any reference to Sefer Vayikra?
Well, the reference to the Sefer Vayikra is merely because these are the offerings that are mentioned in Vayikra. Yeah. Ki tavo le'ra'ot panai. And then God goes a step further. When you come to see me, in other words, when you're coming to Yerushalayim, to the Beit HaMikdash, to fulfill, the Aliyah L'Rega, when you're supposed to go up for the 3 pilgrimages, mi vikesh zot miyedchem, remos chatzerai. Who asked you to bring these things? Romes chatzerai. Romes, the remos is to trample. Chatzerai are my courtyards. In other words, God says, when you're coming and you're bringing these things that, again, I don't need, I'm fed up with, and I don't want, I consider your visit to the Beit HaMikdash as a situation where you're violating the Beit HaMikdash. You're trampling over my courtyards. You're doing something, you think you're doing something good. I got to tell you, I find this despicable. Romeis Chatzerai. And Rashi says after the fact that you're not, that your hearts are not with me. Yeah, Jim.
When were actually canonized in the Tanakh?
The canonization of the Tanakh is taking place during the era of the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, during the time, let's say, around Ezra and Nehemiah, not long afterwards. So it's around the 4th, 5th century BC.
The temple was still.
The second Beit HaMikdash was around. This is the first Beit HaMikdash that we're discussing. Okay, the temple was still there, and Yeshayahu's prophecies, it was written after, Yeshayahu, if you remember, was murdered, and so it was written after that time. The Anshe Knesset HaGdolah finished it off. But when you look at all of this, it's reminiscent also what's going to be going on in the second temple. Same thing happened. Similar things happen today as well. We do the exact same things. Okay, just to quote I think my mother may be online, but if not, I'll tell her I quoted. To quote my grandmother, we had the old Yiddish saying, "A galach is frum, a yid is ehrlich." Okay, a priest is pious, a Jew is, however you say ehrlich. What? No, huh? Honest is a mensch. Another English word that we can't translate. Okay, so the reality is, these kinds of things. Judaism is not about the ritual. The ritual is supposed to elevate the Jew. The ritual is a means to an end, as opposed to the ritual being the end unto itself. So when you go, for example, some of the rituals in other religions, no matter what the intent is, you go, you say something is said, and you're done. You've been saved. We try to save people also. Okay, but okay, that's the other one I know, that so and so saves, Jews invest. But anyways, but the reality of all of that is that we have the ritual to reach someplace, and they were going there. They were viewing the ritual purely as an end. Lo tosifu pasuk yud gimel, and he's not going to let up on this. Lo tosifu havim minchat shav. Don't stop bringing your offerings. The mincha is the flour offering that is meaningless. Shav is nothing. Ketoret to'evahili. Your incense is despicable to me. So again, we're upping the game with each one of these pieces. Meaningless, despicable. Chodesh v'Shabbat, kiro mikra, you go ahead and you call out your holidays, right? Mikra kodesh yelachem, right? We always call out the holidays. We establish the holidays, but lo uchal aven va'atzara. But at the very same time, I can't deal with this. I can't deal with this sin and these gatherings. So God, in each one of these levels, interestingly, Schwab again says, God says, I can't abide, lo uchal aven v'atzara, I can't abide by your hypocrisy, is the way he translates it. We have the ability, for example, that we establish, the Jewish people were responsible for the establishing of the holidays, right? Because based on testimony, we would establish when Rosh Chodesh was. If you establish when Rosh Chodesh is, you know when the dates are, right? So the actual occurrence of a holiday was dependent upon action of the Jews doing it. However, as Rashi notes, okay, we can't handle this because you're turning all the time to avodah zarah, you're turning to idolatry, and you can't coexist. So I can't deal with this. When it comes to your Rosh Chodesh and when it comes to your holidays, san'anafshi are despicable to me. Now, what's fascinating is if you think about it in davening, when we daven on Yontif, vatiten lanu, right? So and so and so, be'ahava muadim l'simcha, etc. When we talk about the holidays, okay, we talk about that those holidays have to be things that are beloved, and those holidays are things that are filled with joy. What God says, your holidays today are despised, what you're doing. You're not doing it. Hayu alai l'torach. They are, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, they're a pain in the neck for me. They're just bothersome to me. Nileti naso. Nileti is a word, I'm tired. Okay, nileti is from the word yigia. Okay, in Hebrew, the Mari Kraz says, I was up till now, I was able to bear all of your sins. I just can't bear it anymore. I can't deal with it anymore. And as a result, uvefarishchem kapechem alim einai mikem. When you raise up your hands, I will hide my eyes. I'll close my eyes from them. Now, when do we raise up hands? So one is Birkas Kohanim. The easy one is the Birkas Kohanim, and that's Targum Yonatan. Targum Yonatan says in this pasuk, Kad Kahanaya, when the priests, when the Kohanim, Parsin Yadhon, Litzal Alechon, when they lift up their hands to pray to you, Maslikna Apei Shchinte Minchon. I turn away my Shechina from you. So when they lift up their hands. Interestingly, the Abarbanel says, wait a second. This is not just addressed to the Kohanim. So when else do you lift up your hands? Davening. When you daven. Okay, and it's not like nowadays, nowadays people where they have all these hand motions, and sometimes when they daven, it looks like they're in a boxing match. Other times it looks like they're pained. The word, what drives me the craziest is, and I'm sorry, I'm way off subject, but Shoshi, you have a full-time job. Shoshi Kanzan, you have a full-time job as a therapist on this. A chos and kala under the chuppah, when they're not smiling, they're just shuckling, and it's painful for them, it looks like. When I do a chas, and I said, you better have a good time under the chuppah. Okay, but the reality is, when you look at some people davening nowadays, it's like they're not talking about that. Reb Chaim Tzvi Hollander Zal once wrote a response that he said, well, he grew up in Telz. He was the alter bocher for Avraham Chaim Levin Zatzal, and he said he grew up. He never saw Rosh Yeshivas, okay, or the Gedolim of his time with all these motions and all these movements. They would either stand still or they would shuffle. Okay, that's it. But when we talk about raising up my hands, well, raising up my hands is figurative to davening itself. So you have, God says, when you go ahead and you're going to daven, I'm going to close my eyes from them. Not only that, Gam im tarbum tefillah eineni shomea. Even if you daven a lot, I'm not going to pay attention. Why? Yedechem damim maleu. Because your hands have been filled. How does Art Scroll translate that? Filled with blood. How does Sensino translate it? Also filled with blood? Replete with blood. Good. The other one is? Money. So Rashi says, and this is Art Scroll. Remember, Art Scroll is very, very good because Art Scroll tries to be very consistent in its translation following Rashi. Rashi says your hands are filled with blood. Now, hands filled with blood actually come into a later piece about whether or not there's murder and there's other kinds of sins that are taking place. That would be the hands filled with blood. But the Abarbanel, says that damim is kesef, is money. That's another word for money. Your hands are filled with money means, once again, bribery, all of the things that we've been talking about. It's money that motivates everything else. And so your hands, remember, if I'm saying that this whole nevuah really is not about ritual observance as much as it is about the Ben Adam L'Chaviro, how you interact with one another, and the ritual is just like the background to it, the Abarbanel's piece makes all the sense in the world. Because according to the Abarbanel, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, listen, if you're not honest, if you've been bribed, if you're stealing, if you're doing all of these terrible things, I can't pay attention to any of your tefillot. They're insincere. Or to use Rav Schwab's earlier piece, they're hypocrisy. And I've been tired. Remember, nileti neso. I'm tired of putting up with this any longer, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is all, these pieces. Now, once the Navi has laid it out and we're really feeling bad about ourselves, then the Navi says, now let me take you the next step. This is where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is at, and it's still talking in God's voice. So God tells him, the people, and this is the next few psukim of how you can improve. Rachatzu, hizaku, hasiru roam alalechem mineged einai. Wash yourselves, okay? In other words, if your hands are filled, and not to take Rashi's approach, and this one she follows it up, if your hands are filled with blood, wash your hands off, remove it. Okay, you have a number of verbs. Rashi points out that in these next psukim, you're going to have 10 verbs. The 10 verbs are rachatzu, izachu, asiru, chadalu, limdu, dirshu, ishru, shiftu, rivu, lechu, and they are corresponding to the aseret yemei tshuva, to the 10 days of repentance. I want you to do tshuva. Rachatzu hizaku, hasiru ro'am alalechem. Remove the evil of your malalechem, of acts. It's worse. It's a rebellious acts. Ma'al. Yeah. Mineged einai, from before me. Chidlu hareah. Stop doing bad. Interestingly, if you think about all of this, mineged einai, before HaKadosh Baruch Hu said he was turning away. If what HaKadosh Baruch Hu now is opening up the possibility and saying, if you stop doing these things, I'm actually looking at you in front of me. My eyes are on you. Stop doing these things. Limdu hetev. And I want you to learn well. Dirshu mishpat, seek out justice. Ashru chamotz, and strengthen those who have been robbed. Chamotz can mean robbed. Interestingly, Julius Hirsch, Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch's son, Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch's yahrzeit was on Thursday, by the way. His son says that his father's approach would not have been chamotz, meaning that which you steal, but rather it would be like the same word as chometz. What does chometz really mean? Chometz is bubbling. Okay, so it's the fermentation process. So he says, bring healing to what is still agitating. Okay, ashru chamotz, try to lower, I would actually probably in English, I'd say lower the temperature a bit. Try to lower that tumult. Shiftu yatom rivu almana. And what I want you to do is I want you to go back to the very basic things that we need to do, and that is take care of the orphan and the widow. Now you see why this is all seems to be with the tshuva he's talking about. Nowhere does it say yet, okay? Does it say, hey, bring korbanot with the right intent? Nowhere does it say, I want you to daven with the right kavon. But what it says is, I want you to start taking care of people, which goes back to why this is probably talking about the mitzvot ben adam lechavero. Lechuna, pasuk yud chet, lechuva v'nivakcha. Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, okay, you did what you did, I'm doing what I'm doing, let's get into it, okay? I want to hear your complaints, you'll hear my complaints, let's figure out what's really going to go. Let's get into this argument a little bit. Yomar Hashem, said God. Im yuchata'echem kashanim, if your sins will be like crimson, kasheleg yalbinu, I'll whiten them like snow. Im yadimu ketola, and if they will be reddened like the dye that comes from that worm, katsemer you, then they will be like wool. Now, it's a parallelistic structure. Obviously, we have these two, we have white and red, two different kinds of white, two different kinds of red. There's a parallelism, it's poetic, but there's a difference between those two images. You have two reds and two whites. One red is shani, is crimson thread. The second is ketola. Says the Malbim, one is something that is inherently red, and one is something that is dyed red. That's part one. In other words, if you sinned, I will whiten your sins. If you caused others to sin, if you were the agent for causing the red, okay, you were the dye, D-Y-E, then I will cause that to be whitened as well. But Rav Schwab focuses more on the white. There's snow and there's wool. What's the difference in the white of snow versus the white of wool? Okay.
It's very, very white.
Snow is very, very white. Now, not before the plows come and the snow and the salt gets on. It's really, really, really white. Wool.
It's not so
It takes a lot of effort to get it white. And says Rav Schwab that what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, listen, if you do tshuva like you're supposed to be doing tshuva. And if tshuva is all that is necessary, it'll be like sheleg. You're going to be whitened. You will be forgiven. But if what your deeds had been such that it requires not just tshuva, but some element of punishment to go along with it, he says it's going to be tzemer. It may be like it needs multiple washings, but ultimately we will get to that point. And so we're dealing with two different scenarios of sin according to this parallelism. Next, im tovu ushmatem, if you accept the Torah, if you want to accept the Torah and you listen, tuv haaretz tochelu, you'll be able to eat of the best of the land. Vim tima'anu umeritem, but if you refuse and you are rebellious, cherev to uklu, you will be consumed by the sword. Notice how these two psukim use that same shoresh aleph chof lamed to eat. One is the reward is eating. The other is the eating is the punishment. Kipi Hashem diber. This is what God said. This is, by the way, these two psukim are the source of a very famous medrash that I'm sure many people have heard, that the hasayif v'hasefer yardu kruchim min hashamayim. Okay, that both the sword and the book have come intertwined from the heavens, which is the way Chazal talked about that there's no middle ground. Okay, you do good, it's good. You do bad, it's bad. You can't do a little bit of good or a little bit of bad. Okay, a little bit doesn't work on this. You have to try to go for the whole thing. Hasayif v'hasefer, here you have tochlu to uklu. Okay, you will eat or you will be consumed. I saw a hand somewhere. Now that is the third part of this parak. First part again was the koteret, was like the introduction of where we find out Yeshayahu is a Navi and during what period he did. The second one was the tochacha that took us up to pasuk tet, the end of pasuk tet, from bet until tet, shimu shamayim azini aretz, right? The third part now was talking about the korbanot, but really talking about ritual and worship and how that's not the key, but rather what's the key is behavior. Okay, we don't set it aside. It's not like, and there were some times where people would say, they would have these strange comments, I'm a Jew in my heart. Okay, where they would say, really what it means to be a Jew is to be a good person. But you know what? Those are great things, but that's not the end and the end of everything. We have both ritual, we have thought, ritual, and speech. All three are necessary, but the idea of all three, Rav Hirsch used to say that all three were necessary to create, what was his phrase? His phrase was the Yiddish Mensch, I think it was, the ultimate of a Jewish, no, not Weltanschauung. He wanted people, and it was we had to rise up to be the highest expression of humanity. That all of the things we do, not Ubermensch, no. Rise up to the highest element of humanity that we could do. Okay, and the highest element of humanity are the beliefs, the behaviors, interactions, all of those, but they require those other pieces along the way. Okay.
Wait, I have a question.
Yes.
So this is more a theological question. So I've been listening to a lot of podcasts lately about all the kids who aren't kids, they're in their 30s or 40s who are leaving Yiddishkeit. And one of the reasons why the thought process is that because it's very rigid, it's either good or evil. Exactly what you're just saying, the good and the evil. And how we now in the communities are trying to bring these people back in by saying, hey, we accept you for where you are. We'll work with you for where you are. And let's not be as rigid in our thinking. So I'm wondering.
I think that we're talking about two different things. We're talking about how you're able to reach out to people who have been lost or are path to this, and how we have to bring them in and accept whatever it is.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about people who have been from their whole lives who are leaving Frumkeit.
No, we're talking the same thing. I
Oh.
understood what you said. I'm saying, I think the distinction is like this. When we're dealing with trying to save a person, and bring the person back under the wings of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, we're trying to save that person. In that sense, we will do things incrementally. I will give you a great little story from many, many years ago when we still had Talmud Torahs. We used to have afternoon Hebrew schools, and in the Talmud Torahs, I remember Rabbi Lichstein Zal, he would tell us that, if a kid said he wanted to keep kosher, he'd say, don't keep kosher right away. Have separate milk and meat. And they would celebrate separate milk and meat. And then if they were doing that really well and it was working out, then they would go the next step and the next step and the next step. Incremental change is the way you can bring about both that salvation and also that sense of return. You can't go ahead and tell a person, listen, you're stopping to be frum, and either you do it all or you don't do it all. You do it all, you're fine. You don't do it all, you're going to hell, even if you do 98%. Okay, you can't say that. On the other hand, I think we're also talking about what is the goal and the ideal. The goal and the ideal is not 98%. The goal and the ideal is 100%. We find ourselves now, the last piece of the puzzle is Judaism is a religion that is rigid. And by the way, in studies that have been done of the church in Christianity, the denominations of Christianity that are the most demanding are the ones that are actually keeping the most number of people, even though nowadays there are fewer people. That's why, by the way, when you look at it, in fact, Rabbi Sachs has a beautiful piece about this, why Pesach is the most observed of the Jewish holidays, even though it's the hardest of Jewish holidays. Ultimately, things that require people to make sacrifice, require people to do things, and not that everyone keeps Pesach the right way, but that they have a piece of matzah right before they have their turkey sandwich. That piece of matzah is still something. We keep hold of it. So I think we should celebrate the idea that we have rules. But we also have to be very understanding and understand that not everyone is there yet, or some people were there and have left that. And then the last piece on this, and then Yafa has a comment, part of this also is that we have created a very new strange structure. This is something David Beshefkin and I were talking about on a different podcast. And that was that ultimately, we are the first generation where we've kept the bubble in place until somewhere in the early to mid 20s. That the very first time for many of our community's children where they exit the bubble is after they finish university, because they're going to Jewish universities, or after they finish kollalim, and all of a sudden they find themselves. And if they haven't fit the model exactly, they find that existential problem when they're really on their own. In that mid upper 20s, and maybe even to the low 30s. And that's where once upon a time we talked about teens at risk. We now really should be talking about the 20s or 30s at risk. And it's a different dynamic. Yafa?
Isn't this text talking about empty ritual versus, because ritual does bind us together, but it's empty ritual because what they're doing is they're driving each other away with these terrible.
Right, and by the way,
social
if you push it,
perhaps they're.
so if you put it a different way, I think there's two different pieces of nowadays. One is what the sociologist Charles Liebman called compartmentalization of Judaism, that we can have these people who are davening with fervor, who go into the business places and steal with the same intensity. Okay, they compartmentalize. They have their little boxes. They have their davening box. They have their theft. They have their business box. They have their interaction box. That's Liebman's piece of compartmentalization. It goes back to 60s, 70s when he brought that up. And I think the other piece is also which was about 10 years ago, is the whole idea of social orthodoxy, where people don't have the intent. The ritual to them is a means of connection as opposed to a means towards a greater belief. So yeah, what the Navi Yeshayahu is talking about here is he's focusing on, they're still coming to the Beit HaMikdash, they're still offering sacrifices, they're still doing the stuff, and at the same time, they're worshiping Avodah Zarah, they're getting too close to foreign cultures, they're doing all these other things. How do you do it? And he says, you can't do it. You got to turn. Yeah, Jim.
I think going back to 18, that comment coming out and less reasonably better. Only Sam and I would remember this, but this is the comment that President Johnson made when he departed the plane after Kennedy was assassinated.
He quoted
You know, I only
he
think
quoted
about it.
he quoted the pasuk, or that's what he said. Oh, he did quote the pasuk. Interesting. Okay, interesting. We're now going to get into a couple more psukim of Kino. Okay, and famous, you'll hear the words, you'll know them, you'll recognize them. Okay, and we're going to do 3 psukim of lament, and then we're going to go back into the piece of how to move forward. So the 3 psukim of lament start out with the famous word, echa, how. Now the word echa, we find there are 3 famous echas. You've heard this many times. Moshe said echa, okay, and Yirmiyahu says echa here, and Yirmiyahu says echa in the book of Echa, and Yeshayahu says echa. Each of them is talking about, the Medrash talks about at the beginning of echa, that each of them is at a different point in the Jewish people. Moshe Rabbeinu talks about when the people are ascendant. Yeshayahu is talking about when they're falling down, and Yirmiyahu talks about the time when they've been totally destroyed. That word Eicha is a fascinating word. Okay, it's a word of lament, and basically what it is, a word that says is that in the Das Sofrim, Rabinovich says like this. He says that when you would normally think that according to the normal chain of events, this would not be the consequence. And so you look back and you say, wait a second, how did this happen? And that's the word Eicha. Eichai talezona kirya nemana. So how did the faithful city become a zonah? Now, a zonah, if you can mean a harlot, a prostitute, but zonah also talks about whenever someone moves off the path. Okay, so you have atem zonim, right? When we talk about idolatry, you have turned to other gods. So how did this faithful city turn away? Meaning, how did this faithful city become unfaithful? Meleti mishpat, the city that was filled with mishpat. The yud is a poetic yud here. Okay, so it's really melet. Okay, the city that was filled with justice, meaning, remember, that was the seat of the Sanhedrin, was in Yerushalayim. Tzedek yalinba, it was the place where righteousness would reside in it. Okay, interestingly, Rashi brings a medrash that people would come to Yerushalayim because Yerushalayim was the place of the Beit HaMikdash. They would offer the korban tamid in the morning. They would offer the daily sacrifice, and they would be given forgiveness. So you sleep overnight in Yerushalayim, you're going to get your forgiveness. It was the place where it said, ve'atam meratzchim, and now it is filled with murder, with murderers. Now, interestingly, ve'atam meratzchim is missing part of that phrase. If you look at the word, fine, that's a complete phrase, right? How could this faithful city become a city that is not, okay, that is veered away? Maleti mishpat tzedek yalimba. It was a city filled with mishpat, okay, place where tzedek, where righteousness resided. Ve'atam meratzchim. We're missing. You're now filled with meratzchim. You're now meratzchim live here. Something, you're missing something, and it's the poetic form, because what he's trying to do is create that jarring statement. You stop on that word of murderers, all of a sudden it wakes you up. Your money is filled with dross. Now, what that means, very simply, it's like our quarters now, right? It's a copper quarter with a little bit of silver overlay on it. The reality is, when you're in the ancient world and you're weighing things and you weigh something, well, this is a way of theft. So what they would do is they would steal. Now, Ibn Ezra says this isn't really talking about the money so much as the people. It's talking about the leadership. The Kesef is talking about the Shoftim and the Sarim, he says, about the judges and about the officials of the country. They put on this great show, but underneath the great show, it's all false. Sav'ech mahul b'mayim, and your wine. Now, sav'ech is any kind of drink that is intoxicating. So it is watered down, okay, and it's mahul b'mayim. Now, why? So some of the Mefarshim say, well, because your money is worthless, when I'm going to sell you some wine, I'm not going to sell you the good wine for the worthless money. I'll sell you the lousy wine for the worthless money. We're coming out all even. Okay, whatever it is, it could be just a parallelism here as well. Sarayich sorurim. Okay, your officers, your officials are sorurim, rebellious. The chavrei genavim, and they're in cahoots with the thieves. Now, Sarayich, notice it's starting from the top. The Radak says, where does the rot begin? It's at the top. Okay. Kulo ohev shochat. They love their briberies. Verodev shalmonim, and they're chasing after payments. Shalmonim is from the word tashlumim, that they want to. Yatom lo yishpotu v'riv almana lo yavo alehem. Remember, when we talked about just a little while ago back in Pasuk Yud Zayin, when he says, how are you going to solve things? Shivtu yatom rivu almana. Go ahead and take care of the widow and of the orphan. And here, what do they say? We don't take care of the widows. We don't take care of the orphans anymore. That's how bad it's become. Lachen. Therefore, and now here is the prophecy. Okay, we've set the stage. Here comes the prophecy. The end of the parak it's going to lead to. Lachen. Ne'um ha'adon Hashem tzvakot avir Yisrael. These are the words of the Master, the God of hosts, the mighty one, okay, or as Julius Hirsch says, the driving force of Israel. Okay, now why does it have all of these terms here? Well, Adon is very simply, who are the ones who are creating this problem? We talked about the Sarim, the officials. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, they think they're in charge. This is what I'm going to say. I'm the one over them. And this is what I'm going to say. And I'm going to push this forward. The Avir Yaakov, it's with force. Hoi, enachem mitzarai ve'inakma me'oivai. I will find, now, okay, enachem, I assume the translators say, I will find comfort, consolation. How do they translate it? Ease, relieve, very good. Okay, now, nachem, the shorish nun chet mem. Okay, we normally talk about nechama, comfort. So Rav Shamshon Rafal Hirsch explains that comfort really is not what the word means. Nachem means to change your mind. Okay, Hashem, right? God changes his mind or takes a different approach to things, or we view it as he's taking a different approach. Nachem means when a person is comforted, they've been able to change their mindset from one of loss and tragedy to one of acceptance. And that's the nechama, which we talk about. And that's why nachem and nechama. So while the Ibn Ezra says that enachem, I will find nechama, I will find comfort. Rav Schwab says on this that I'm going to change my approach. Enachem, mitzarai, and how I deal with those who are against me. Ve'inakma me'oivai, and I will get vengeance against my enemy. Who are these people, the tzarai and oivai? It's a machloket. The Mitzudot says that this is actually against the Jews who are doing the wrong thing. God's going to take them out. Okay. According to the Radak, no, this is against the enemies of Israel themselves. These are against the enemies that challenge, that threaten the Jewish people. And what happens? Ve'ashiva yadi alayich, I'm going to place my hand on you. Now, who is the you? You is, according to the Dat Mikra, says Yerushalayim. That's where we started with. Remember? The Kiryat Ne'emana. I'm going to place my hand. I'm going to be protective of you, to deal with you. Rashi says, no, I'm going to put my hand on you. That's the people who sin. In other words, I'm going to put a hand on you. Okay, not a comfort, but it's going to be a punishment. Ve'etzrof kabor sigayach, and I will purify, like with soap, all of the dross. In other words, I'm going to solve the problems. Kabor, as Rashi says, Rashi quotes French, okay, in this, he says that it's the Lashon Sabon, soap. In Hebrew, we use the word sabon also. Okay, it's soap. He's going to be using the kabor. Okay, and the asira kol b'dilayich, and I'm going to take out the cheap metal. In this case, it was tin that had been mixed into it. So we saw what they were doing. And now HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm going to do this, the opposite. Vashiva shoftayich kavarishona. And I'm going to bring back your judges as they once had been. Now, when were they as once had been? As once had been in the times of David and Shlomo, when we were at the greatest time of our nation. V'yoatzayich kivat chila. And I'm going to bring back like they were, like originally the advisors had been. That all of this had started with the top echelon. They were the corrupt ones. I'm going to bring in a new group of leaders that's going to take care of it. And when I do this, then they will once again call you the Ir HaTzedek. They'll call Yerushalayim the Ir HaTzedek. We started out that this was Echai Taluzona Kiryat Nemana, how far away has Yerushalayim become from being the city of faith. And now we're saying God is going to bring us back to the city of righteousness, the Kiryat Nemana, the city filled with faith. Tzion b'mishpat tipadeh. The ultimate redemption of Yerushalayim is going to be through mishpat. Okay, mishpat is judgments, or as the Marie Kras says very simply, bizchut anshe emet v'tzedakah tiyeh kibbutz galuyot. He says ultimately people are going to come back to Yerushalayim when Yerushalayim is the city that's known as the righteous city. Again, this goes back and supports the idea of this whole parak being about the absence of tzedek and mishpat, not the absence of religious fervor. And those who have been held captive will be brought back b'tzedakah with the same sense of righteousness. There is a machloket here, by the way. According to the Radak, all of this is talking about Yemot HaMashiach, in the times of the Messiah. According to the other Meforshim, no, it's talking about a more immediate time. God says this can happen now. And then,
according to the redacted, the people need to look, because if he switches now into Chavdalah, that all this is about Hashem coming in and saving the Jewish people from their enemies.
So this goes back to a later prophecy, which will have a Yeshayahu be Torah Chishana. Okay, if you remember, there's a famous statement later on. It's one of the great statements that is grappled with by the early religious Zionists, that God will redeem us at the right time and early. And it depends totally on our behaviors. Okay, and so according to the Radak, what you're saying is that this will definitively happen, and God is going to do this. He's going to take the power of it. Whereas the other Meforshim say, no, this can be happening right now. B'shever posh'im v'chataim yachdav, God says, V'shever posh'im v'chataim yachdav. It is, while Tzion is going to be a mishpat and is going to be redeemed, V'shever, this is what's called the Vav Hanigud. It's creating a contrast, the Vav. It's not and in the normal sense, it is rather, or at the same, instead, or something like that. V'shever, the breaking of the Posh'im and Chataim Yachdav. Posh'im and Chataim, they're two different levels of people who do sin. Poshim are people who are doing it with intent. Chataim are people who may be doing it unintentionally. That whole attitude is going to be broken, okay? Because it's not enough to have the shoftayich and yoatzayich, to have the judges, the leadership be tzaddikim. You need the regular people. V'ozvei Hashem yichlu. But those who have totally left God, for them, as the Dat Sofrim says, the doorway for tshuva is going to be closed off. They're going to end. So the people who are able to be redeemed and saved will be redeemed and saved. There will be a class of people we won't be dealing with. Ki yevoshu me'elim asher chamadatam v'tachperu mehaganot asher bachartam. Why? Because we have given up hope, okay, that they have, because Yevoshu me'elim asher chamadatem, okay, from the rams, from actually, I'm sorry, this is elim are the trees which you would worship, okay, the kinds of trees that you were worshiping, we just gave up on it. You've been worshiping this avodah zarah. You loved it. And you went ahead and you went into these beautiful places you love to have. Again, it was all descriptions of avodah zarah that was taking place. There is going to be some people we won't be able to resolve. Ki tiyu ke'ele novelet aleha. You're going to be like the tree whose leaves will wither, and like, instead of these beautiful gardens you used to go through, you're going to be like a garden which hasn't been watered. And ultimately, the strong ones will be like the leftover flax, which is used like kindling. And it's going to be burnt, it's going to be a spark, and they will be burnt, meaning those who have not been able to do the tshuva, those who have created this horrific situation for us, and there's not going to be anything that's going to be saving them. Yeah.
So the insertion of avodah zarah in here seems like so by the way.
Yeah.
Like what's it doing there?
So I would suggest that what it's talking about, not so much the avodah zarah. He doesn't really attack the avodah zarah. He's attacking the people who are doing the avodah zarah. So I think it's talking about the most extreme. In other words, if you remember about who the people we're talking about, we have the people who are going to the Beis Hamikdash. And God says, I'm not interested in your narishkeit anymore. What you're doing is just for show. We have to repair that. And then we're talking about the people who have gone well beyond going to the Beit HaMikdash, have now gone to other idols. Those people are going to be beyond.
They're lost.
Okay, they're going to be beyond. The people who were doing the wrong things, but still were connected in some way, there was something still there. Those are the people that Yeshayahu says, not only are we going to save, we're going to raise up once again and return to what had been. There is this idea that there are some people, unfortunately, who may suffer the ultimate punishment. We don't believe that everyone at all times. Look, we're going to be dealing next week with Yetzias Mitzrayim, right? V'chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, that only 20% of the people who lived in Egypt were actually taken out at the time of the Exodus, that there was 80%, according to the Medrash, who died at the time of the plague of darkness. So it wouldn't diminish the standing of the Jewish people. So we do believe that there are people, unfortunately, who won't be able to be part of the ultimate Geulah. And I think this is where this is ending off, that there are certain things when you cross certain lines, the Navi is saying that those people who've crossed those lines may be unredeemable.
So there's the extremes. Are there clueless people back then?
Yeah, we always had
In the
clueless
middle.
people. We always had
What happens to them?
most of those people, the clueless ones are going to be led to the right way by good leaders.
So getting back to what you said about like a paradigm, there's a social connection from doing a ritual as opposed to.
No, what happens with doing the ritual, there are some people who do ritual nowadays. I don't know if it was in those days. It probably was in those days also. Hey, it's time to go up to Yerushalayim. Let's all go to Yerushalayim. We'll have a good time.
That's what we do.
That's what we do.
It's
It's part of being part of a society. That's what we do, but it doesn't have the intent that goes with it. When they're not going to be, well, not only don't they get it, they may be doing the antithesis of what that opportunity is supposed to create.
What is the ultimate punishment that you're talking about?
They're lost.
So, let's go, not individually, there's no ultimate punishment for the individual.
Individuals have punishments, but also we're talking more about the nation. There may be segments of the nation that we're not able
Okay,
to
that's
maintain.
what-
Okay, one last thing. Next week, I'm gonna be out of town. I apologize. 2 weeks, we're gonna start back, and then I think we should be almost every week. So in 2 weeks, we're gonna be back. Perek Bet. Okay.